Thanks very much, everybody. Good morning. Great to be here today. Let me begin by thanking the city of Port St. Lucie for once again sponsoring this important event. It's great that they do this, an opportunity to create some awareness as hurricane season begins once again. And let me thank you for showing up. I know I can think of a lot of different things I would be doing this morning as opposed to listening to me yap on about hurricanes and so forth. So thank you very much for coming out today. I appreciate it. So hurricane season is here. Let me give you a little update on today's weather. It's going to be very hot. Big surprise, right? It's June 1st, but yesterday we had the hottest day of the year so far. The temperatures hit 90 or higher. The overnight low was about 80, and the dew points were in the low to mid 70s, so the heat index at times yesterday in the mid 90s. Today, the heat index, what it feels like, could come close to 100 degrees. So you're in a good spot here at the Port St. Lucie Civic Center. Let's just hope and pray the AC doesn't go out because it would be rough to say the least. In terms of the tropics, it's June 1st, the hurricane season underway, and we're actually tracking something today. If you saw Vanessa this morning, and by the way, she's here along with yours truly for this event, and I would recommend that you go and check out all the great vendors in the next room. But there's a disturbance in the Gulf of Mexico, in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico called the Bay of Campeche. And there's a disturbance there that has a pretty decent chance of becoming perhaps a tropical depression, maybe an outside chance of a tropical storm over the next couple of days. It's a short window for development. It'll be in the Gulf, in that bay, today, tomorrow, and perhaps Monday. And then in all likelihood, it will make landfall in Mexico and produce a lot of rain for them. If it does develop, it'll be the second storm of the 2019 hurricane season. We had Andrea, you may remember, a couple weeks ago, and this would be Barry, so the hurricane season is off to a quick start. So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about what happened last year and go through what we can kind of expect during a hurricane season. Talk about where storms form and when storms form during the 6 months. And then if anyone has a question at any point, I will try to answer the question. So let's begin with a look back at a couple years ago. We all know this storm, right? This was Hurricane Irma. Here we are, here's the storm, here we are in Florida. And you know, one of the reasons that Florida has been hit by so many tropical storms and hurricanes is because of geography. We kind of stick out, don't we? If you look at a map, we have a stick out problem. We stand out. And because of that, all these tropical storms that are in the Western Atlantic, the Caribbean, or the Gulf of Mexico, they hit us. And here on the east coast of Florida, say from Fort Pierce all the way down to the Keys, that area is even more exposed. So because of simple geography, we have a possibility of being hit by a tropical storm or hurricane just about every year. Last year we were lucky. We did not have a storm. 2 years ago we were watching this guy, which scared the bejesus out of all of us. It was a Category 5. It moved off the coast of Africa, kept that Category 5 status for quite some time, and then was coming right towards South Florida. This is when everything changed, when this Category 5 hurricane hit Cuba. That was not expected. That was not in the forecast from the National Hurricane Center, which for the most part does a fabulous job. But because that Category 5 hurricane hit Cuba, it pretty much saved us here in South Florida. It was bad for Cuba, but that storm spent 24 hours over the island. And by the time it reemerged and started moving toward the Florida Keys, it was a Category 3, still incredibly powerful. And if you've seen the pictures from the Keys, you know how bad things were just a couple years ago. But it would have been so much worse if that storm had not weakened. Last year, there were 2 storms that really got everyone's attention. The first in September was Florence, which was a Category 1 storm that made landfall in North and South Carolina. And you think Category 1, that's not a big deal. But what happened is when that storm made landfall, it stopped. It didn't move. And North and South Carolina had some of the worst flooding in their history. That's one of the keys. It doesn't always have to be a big, powerful storm to cause a lot of problems. The forward speed of a tropical system is very important, and we'll talk about that. And the other system last year was this one, Hurricane Michael. This is a satellite loop of Hurricane Michael making landfall in Mexico Beach. We now know that it was a Category 5. And thankfully, there have only been 4 Category 5 hurricanes ever to hit the United States, and Florida has been hit by 3 of them. We had the Labor Day storm of 1935 that hit the Keys. We had Hurricane Andrew in 1992, which hit southern Miami-Dade County. And last year we had this storm, Hurricane Michael, a Category 5 making landfall right there in Mexico Beach. I remember that day so clearly because I was in the weather office watching the reports from the recon, and the pressure kept dropping as the storm got closer and closer to landfall. And as the pressure drops, the storm is getting more powerful and the winds will start to increase. And at one point, as the storm made landfall, it had a central pressure lower than Hurricane Andrew. And I knew it was going to be bad, not just from a wind standpoint, but from a storm surge standpoint, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, especially the western coast of Florida, which is so prone to storm surge. So about 10 days ago, as we were putting together our hurricane program that aired the other night, we spent several days in Mexico Beach because I wanted to see firsthand how things are now, 7 months after the storm. So let me take you to Mexico Beach. Well, first, here's the storm actually making landfall. You can see that eye, the eye wall. The storm surge in Mexico Beach was anywhere from 12 to 15 feet high. We interviewed there were 4 hotels in Mexico Beach. There's only 1 left now. The other 3 were destroyed. And the remaining hotel is right on the beach. And I was talking to the people who are working to renovate it. And one of the workers said that the watermark on the hotel was 20 feet high. So that gives you an idea how high the water was there. And by the way, that hotel, he said, won't be ready probably until the fall of 2020. So let's go back to Mexico Beach. This was May 21st. The first thing you notice is there's not many homes left on Mexico Beach. And this was, as you probably know, a beautiful, family-friendly beach town, home to about 1,200 residents year-round, but a lot of people would go there during the winter season, a lot of the folks coming down from up north. This is one of the few remaining structures, and as you can see, it's not exactly fit for habitation at the moment. One of the issues they have at Mexico Beach is that the homes that are left there are owned by people who live somewhere else. It's like their second home. And they have yet to come down and really kind of take ownership and kind of remove things. Here's another house. This one really struck me. If you look closely here, here's an air conditioner just hanging out. And that right there is actually a mattress, a bed that you can see in the window. And if you look in the window, you can also see clothing. You can see the belongings of people. But perhaps the most striking aspect about all of this, well, here's another one. This is right on the beach. This was a couple stories high. And that gives you an idea of what the water did. Not necessarily the wind, but what the water did. But this is what you see mostly. You see a lot of foundations, a lot of empty slabs, dozens and dozens and dozens. We brought our drone and we put it up and we flew, and it was just row after row of foundations, of slabs where homes used to sit. And that is the power of a Category 5 hurricane. We saw, you would see belongings there. I saw a knife there, a fork in some spots. There was, the only thing left in one house was actually a toilet. It survived, nothing else was there. Now, the people got out. 16 people did die from the hurricane, but it was just a testament to how powerful Mother Nature can be and how powerful a Category 5 hurricane can be, to say the least. So that was Mexico Beach. The recovery is underway, but I'll be honest with you, it's going to be a long time, I think, before they get back to any semblance of normal. It's interesting, when you're in Mexico Beach during the day, it's very active. There's a lot of workers there. Renovation is underway. And by the way, the other thing to point out is all around this area, there were for sale signs up, and several of the foundations had already been sold. So people were going to buy a house or put up another house where that one had been destroyed. And by the way, this is just a few yards from the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, you're right on the beach. It's just crazy. The other factor is the building codes in that part of Florida are a little different. You know, after Hurricane Andrew hit in 1992, Miami-Dade County adopted one of the toughest building codes in the country. And Broward County followed suit, Palm Beach County then, and eventually a statewide building code was adopted that became one of the toughest in the nation. So homes built after, say, 1996 here in Florida are really well built and can withstand a tropical storm or a hurricane. And I think it's also the law now, according to the building codes, that when you buy a house, a new house, for example, it has to have either impact windows or storm shutters. They come with the house. So that just makes sense. Well, in the Panhandle, especially Mexico Beach, Panama City area, the legislators up there were able to get into the law a little different aspect that allowed for the building codes not to be as stringent. So, for example, our codes are supposed to handle winds up to about 150, 160 miles per hour. Up there, the code says the winds only have to be up to 110 miles per hour. And the argument was, well, big hurricanes don't hit the Panhandle. That's what the legislators said. And I can recall a conversation with Dr. Bob Sheets, the former director of the Hurricane Center, who for a while worked in television. I had the privilege of working with him. He was kind of our hurricane expert. And he just was so upset about that. He said, of course, hurricanes, big ones, hit up there. And now, as we know, they did. So I think it's going to be a long time before Mexico Beach is going to recover. Back to my point, it's active during the day, lots of people working. But as soon as the sun sets, all those people leave. I don't think very many people live in Mexico Beach right now. Hopefully, they'll get back to normal. So let's talk about Florida and our geography problem. Look at that. Here's a look at all the tropical storms and hurricanes, and you can see why we have an issue, as do the Caribbean. But look at that. So we've had our share of storms. 2 years ago was Irma. 3 years ago it was Matthew. Remember that storm? We had Wilma. Wilma was quite the storm. It came off the coast of Africa, was down here in the Yucatan Peninsula. At one point, it had the smallest eye we've ever seen, 2 miles in diameter. Just an incredibly powerful storm. It was late in October. The jet stream came down, picked it up, and took it right over Florida. And because that storm was coming from the west and moving to the east, I have a feeling many people did not prepare as hard as they might for Frances and Jean the year before, simply because, well, it's coming from the west. By the time it hits here, it'll be much weaker. Well, it wasn't. We had Frances and Jean in 2004. I'm just going through a little hurricane history, but 2004 was a crazy hurricane season. We had 4 hurricanes hit Florida in 6 weeks. We had Charlie on the west coast, Frances hit right here around Sewell's Point. We had Ivan hit in the Panhandle, a Category 3 storm, and then we had Jean hit exactly in the same spot 3 weeks later. 2005 was off the charts crazy. There were so many storms, we ran out of names. We started using the Greek alphabet. I don't know if anyone remembers that. I remember that. It was crazy. Hurricane season started early and just kept on going. That was the year also of Hurricane Katrina. That was the year of Hurricane Wilma. That was just a crazy year. So yeah, we have a lot of hurricane history, to say the least. Hurricane season starts in June, but it runs for 6 months. 6 sometimes long months. June and July typically are fairly quiet. You don't get a whole lot of activity, certainly not big storms. You get into August, September, and October, and that's where things really pop. September 10th is the statistical peak of hurricane season. And can anyone tell me when Hurricane Irma hit Florida? September 10th, right on the dot. How about that, huh? And then there's a secondary increase in early October, and Palm Beach County and Martin County have actually been hit by more hurricanes in October than in September. Again, it can be pretty crazy from time to time. So let's go month by month. So in June and in July, if a hurricane or tropical system is going to form, it's going to form close to Florida. Here are the favored locations. Again, this is the area, this is the Bay of Campeche down here. This is the area we're watching for that next system. So they'll form here in the Gulf, they'll form in the Western Caribbean, maybe the Western Atlantic. And you're wondering, well, why is that? Because the ingredients for a tropical cyclone are warm water, it's got to be at least 80 degrees. You need a little disturbance, like a tropical wave or an old front. And then finally, you need winds in the upper levels of the atmosphere to be light. You know, most of the time during hurricane season, we have the first two ingredients. The water temperature is warm almost all the time. And number two, we have these little waves, these little tropical disturbances. But what makes a hurricane rare, and keep in mind that on average, there's only 6 hurricanes each year, but what makes a hurricane rare is the wind shear in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere. You can have a good-looking disturbance. It's sitting over the water, and it's just spinning away, and it starts to build vertically into the atmosphere, and then boom, wind shear comes along and kind of lops off its head, and there it goes. It falls apart. So if a storm is going to form in June, it's because the conditions are good here. In July, it starts to get a little warmer out in the Caribbean, so we watch this area and here. But again, June and July typically, as you know, are relatively quiet. Then we get into the real peak of hurricane season. It starts technically August 10th and runs all the way through about October 15th. That 2-month stretch, that's the period that we really have to watch for tropical development, because by then, we're watching these waves move off the coast of Africa. And those are the ones that have the potential to be the historic storms. Storms like Andrew came off the coast of Africa. Storms like Irma, Harvey from a couple years ago, Maria from a couple years ago. These big storms will form off the coast of Africa, move west. There's nothing out here to interfere with them because the water temperatures are warm, and if the upper level environment, if there's no wind shear, they can really blow up and become something active. September, that's the busiest month by far. Water temperature is at its warmest, the wind shear is at its lightest, and you have the most tropical waves. And if we're going to have a tropical system in September, if we're going to have a hurricane, it's going to be in September. And it's often in September that we have multiple storms simultaneously. Last year, at one point, we had 3 storms at the same time. We had Hurricane Florence moving to the Carolinas. We had Hurricane Helene in the North Atlantic. It was over here. And we had Hurricane Isaac in the Caribbean. And that's a crazy time, you know, because the storm you care about is usually the last one the Hurricane Center sends the information out, just from a personal frustration standpoint. You know, we don't care about Helene because it's in the middle of the North Atlantic, and that's always the first one you get. It can be a crazy time during the month of September. But then, as I said, October can be pretty active as well. And in October, this is the area we'll watch. This is where Michael formed in October. And you can see the track. Look at that favorite track, just like that. So a lot of the systems that we deal with in Florida are October. Finally, in November, hurricane season comes to an end. And we're all happy. 6 months. It's a crazy time, but again, the peak is August, September, and early October. Lots of problems with a hurricane, of course. We think mostly of wind, don't we?
Yes.
And I think that's partly our fault in the media because, you know, I'm on TV, they say, Mike, what's the latest on that storm? And I'll say, well, Hurricane blank has winds of 100 miles per hour. It's usually the first thing we say. And that's one measuring stick of the power of a hurricane. But in addition to wind, which obviously can cause problems, there's all sorts of issues. waves and rip currents, tornadoes. We'll show you an example of a hurricane that produced just dozens and dozens of tornadoes. Storm surge right along the coastline, rainfall and inland flooding. And while we talk about wind a lot, it's really the water that claims more lives in a tropical storm or hurricane than any other entity. Last year with Hurricane Michael, it was all that flooding. 16 people died because of the storm surge. In Hurricane Florence, more people died because of inland flooding in North and South Carolina. You know, we see the wind and we can protect our house. If you live, say, west of I-95, you do not live in the evacuation zone, and your house is ready to withstand a storm, you got your shutters, stay there, unless, you know, it's a Category 5 or something like that. But if you live in the evacuation zone, we get you out of there, not because of the wind, but because of the water, the potential for flooding. So let me give you a few examples of what a hurricane can do. This is the Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale, created back in the 1970s. And let's go with a Category 1. And again, this is primarily just talking about some wind, but these are some examples of storms. So Category 1 went 74 to about 95 miles per hour. Category 2, here's Hurricane Wilma. Remember all the blue tarps that we dealt with? Hurricane Ike hit Houston. This is downtown Houston. The winds were so strong, the skyscrapers in downtown Houston, many of their windows popped out because as you go higher up, you know, 30, 40, 50 floors up, the winds are even higher than they would be at the surface. So that's an issue for the high rises across parts of Florida. Here we are with a Category 3. It's Hurricane Jean caused some damage to the vehicle assembly building at the Kennedy Space Center. This was Sandy before Sandy became Superstorm Sandy that caused all those issues in the Northeast. It devastated Cuba back in 2012, and this was Rita, a storm that blew up in the Gulf of Mexico. This was a storm that was a Category 1 storm. We talk about how quickly sometimes a storm can intensify. It's called rapid intensification. And Hurricane Rita went from a Category 1 to a Category 5 in about 36 hours, much like Hurricane Michael did last year. Here's a Category 4. This was Ike, again, hitting Cuba first. This is Charlie, back in 2004. Pretty much a windstorm, kind of like Hurricane Andrew. You know, we've had so many different storms impact our part of South Florida over the years, but just about every hurricane is a little bit different from the last. You may recall with Irma, we had all those tornado warnings, if you were here at the time. A lot of rain, but mostly it seemed like tornado warnings. We were on the air all the time talking about tornado warnings. Matthew, the year before, because it was a coastal storm, was more beach impacts, a lot of rain, some wind impacts. You go back to Wilma, that was mostly a wind event. Francis and Jean, they were mostly rain events. So every storm is a little bit different. And here's a Category 5, mostly Andrew here. I'm going to have to put Michael on there as well. Andrew was pretty much a 20-mile wide tornado that went through southern Miami-Dade County back in August of 1992. Here's some examples of why we put up storm shutters. You need to protect the windows of your house. That's the weakest part of your house. And if you lose your windows and you have airborne debris coming in, you could have some issues. This is the picture taken by Max Mayfield, the former director of the Hurricane Center after Hurricane Andrew. Look at that. That's a pretty good piece of plywood. That had to be moving pretty fast, right? And how about this? I'm guessing this was a shutter that might have been ripped off someone's house from Hurricane Andrew. That's pretty crazy. Water, freshwater flooding, as I said before, that is a big issue. And again, as I talked about with Hurricane Florence earlier on, the amount of water that a tropical system can produce is incredible. And it's directly tied to the forward speed of that system. So one of the keys to watch as a hurricane is approaching is how fast is it moving. If it slows down, as Florence did, that gives it an opportunity to just dump tons and tons of rain. Let me give you an example. This is Houston, Texas. And back in, what was that, 2000, early 2000s, it was a tropical storm, not a hurricane, not a Category 5, just a tropical storm. The winds were about 40 miles per hour. But Tropical Storm Allison went over Houston, Texas, and stopped. It didn't move for 24 hours. So this is the interstate, I-10, right through the heart of Houston, and this is I-10 after the rain. This is the interstate right here. The all-time rainfall record was set not far from here back in 1979 from a tropical depression. Again, not a storm, not a hurricane, it was Tropical Depression Claudette. It moved onshore near Alvin, Texas, and dropped 42 inches in 24 hours. So, and folks have been around for a while like me. There's two things that make Alvin, Texas famous. Number one is that rainfall, and it's also the birthplace of Nolan Ryan. Anyone know who Nolan Ryan is? Okay, all right, good. I don't feel so bad. One of the all-time great pitchers. Okay. So tornadoes. That can be a problem too. And as you can see, back in 2004, the year of 4 storms in 6 weeks, we had issues like Hurricane Ivan. Hurricane Ivan made landfall right there in the Panhandle, and you can see all the little red dots representing tornadoes. Look how many tornadoes that storm produced as it continued to move north. Here it is the next day, making landfall here. Here we are the next day, and here we are the next day. Look at all these tornadoes back in September. So even though it was no longer classified as a hurricane, it was still causing huge problems. Look at some of the other lists here. Rita, which hit Louisiana and Texas. Hurricane Camille, that's another Category 5 hurricane. Look at Katrina, 43. Hurricane Francis hit us. Beulah back in 67. And if you were here for Hurricane Irma a couple years ago, it was just crazy. I can remember the storm hit on a Sunday morning, and when we go into our hurricane mode with covering the storm, we go, all of the folks at the TV station, we work 12 hours on and 12 hours off, kind of like the police officers and first responders. And it's great at the station because they take offices and they bring in mattresses. And Chris Martinez and I, we had a conference room. We were very comfortable, so it's really actually nice. And families are there. We have pets there because our boss wants to bring all the families in. And you know, dogs and cats are parts of the family as well. So if you came to our TV station during hurricane coverage, it would be a menagerie of things. And then the husbands and wives of the employees are cooking food, and it's just like this great community effort. So on that Saturday night, and Irma hit Sunday morning, Chris and I were, and Chris and I worked 3 p.m. to 3 a.m., and Vanessa worked noon to midnight, and then we had Taylor and Sandra work 3 a.m. to 3 p.m. So Chris and I are on, and it's about 5 till 6, and we're going to take a news briefing from Governor Scott, and who was giving those every hour or so, and he did such a great job keeping people up to date. And we're sitting there, and boom, we get a tornado warning, I think for St. Lucie County. So we have 2 chroma keys and 2 workstations. So Chris went to one chroma key, I went to the other chroma key, and we were on the air for 90 minutes because we had tornado warning after tornado warning after tornado warning. It was crazy. You could see the tornadoes in the ocean spinning as they started moving on shore in St. Lucie County. So that was what I remember most distinctly about that storm. The other factor was that by the time the storm made landfall, as I said, it had weakened, and we were so lucky here in St. Lucie County that we didn't deal with a Category 5 hurricane. So this is some of our coverage of Hurricane Irma. Just a few pictures. There's Chris, there's one of those tornadoes. I always give him a hard time. I say, he looks like he's posing here or something, you know? But you can see there, I mean, look at the spin just right offshore, and there's the rotation. And this was Saturday at 7:22. This was a little bit farther north, but look, tornado warning Palm Beach County, and we had another one moving on shore here, just crazy. Here's Sandra. We love Sandra. Sandra does such a great job. I worked with her during Hurricane Matthew She and Chris worked in other shifts, so Sandra and yours truly working together for 12 hours. And, she has so much energy, and you watch her in the morning, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know how she does it. And I was working with her, and I was just amazed at her vocabulary. She comes up with these words, and she told me later that every day when she's in the office, she goes to this website and she has her word of the day. And she works on that word of the day, but it was great. And then the other joke I tell the people at the station is after we worked for 12 hours and the storm had passed and everything was fine, and Chris and I think Vanessa were coming on to replace us, I looked up and Sandra was actually tired. I had never seen her tired before. It was a shocker. And the other thing we did was we did a lot of this, the Facebook Live. We have a little studio set up in our weather office, so the camera can be on me, or I can hit a button and you can see the satellites or the radar, whatever it might be. And we love doing these Facebook Lives because I can talk directly to you. When you go on the Facebook Lives with me, I see your name or your code, whatever it might be, and I can answer your specific question. And that's what I really love about the Facebook Lives, because you can say, hey, I live in Port St. Lucie at this address, and we can look that up and let you know specific information. And 3 years ago, I guess now, we started doing it with Hurricane Matthew. And I was on for like 2-3 hours at a time on Facebook Live. And at one point, the people who are in our web, the .com people, came running back to me. And he was all out of breath. And he said, Mike. And I said, what? He said, Mike, you're trending. And I said, that's great. What's that mean? So apparently it was like the Weather Channel, CNN, and Mike, or something like that. So it was like the boss was very happy about that. But the bottom line is we have a great weather team. We really love what we do. I'll just brag about all our people here. Brittany is off this weekend. She's at a wedding in Key West, but she is about as big a geek as it comes when it comes to weather. Talk about a weather nerd. For example, you hear us talk a lot about the European computer model. Well, that runs twice a day. And this time of year, because of the time change, it comes out about 4 in the afternoon or 4 in the morning. Brittany likes to get up sometimes at 4 in the morning just to see what the computer model says. I mean, she loves what she does. Vanessa is incredibly smart. She's here today. You should come by and please talk to her. She loves what she does. She's a graduate from Florida International University with a degree in meteorology. She got into weather because when she was a young child, Hurricane Andrew went very close to her house in Miami-Dade County. So she loves this weather as well. Chris grew up in Texas. Again, like all of us, it was a weather event. For me, it was tornadoes in Ohio. For him, it was a hurricane that got him involved. And Sandra, she's just fantastic. We have a great team. We're your only certified, most accurate team. I'm required to say that at least once during this presentation. And we love what we do, and I hate to say it, but we really like hurricane season in the sense that we like to track these storms. We don't want a hurricane to come anywhere near St. Lucie County. We don't want to get hit by a hurricane. I like air conditioning as much as the next person. I love electricity. I don't want it to go out. I like my Netflix. I like cable TV. And I get upset when it's not around, because when I had Hurricane Irma hit, I live in Jupiter, my electricity never went out, but my cable was out for 3 days. So it was like, I have no internet at home. I'm going insane. So let's hope it's a quiet hurricane season. Again, a couple things to keep in mind. Know your evacuation zone. If you live in the evacuation zone, try not to go too far. Maybe spend some time with a family or relative. Make friends with someone who's inland. You can make reservations at a hotel now. They'll put your name on a list, so when a hurricane's coming, you'll be prepared for that. If you're going to ride out the storm, make sure that your house is prepared and ready for that. But otherwise, you can count on us to keep you up to date this year. Okay? Thanks very much, everybody.